Welcome to Kinokuniya Bookstore tonight. We're very happy to present author Patricia Walsh Chadwick, who was kicked out of a cult at 17 and started at the bottom of the rung of the ladder in the world of business and worked her way up to the top. She was born in Cambridge, Massachusetts in 1948, received her BA in economics from Boston University, and had a successful 30-year career in the investment business. She culminated as a global partner at Invesco. Today, she sits on a number of corporate boards and blogs on economic, social, and political issues. Her pro bono activities include mentoring young women in high school and college and providing strategic planning advice for not-for-profit organizations. In 2016, she co-founded Anchor Health Initiative, a healthcare company devoted to the needs of the LGBTQ+ community in Connecticut, and serves as the firm's pro bono CEO. She is the author of a previous memoir, Little Sister, which is about that cult, and a mother to twins, a daughter and a son. She lives in Connecticut with her husband John, and I now present to you Patricia Walsh Chadwick.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much. Well, this is really lovely. It's my first book event in a bookstore. My book just came public today, so this is really exciting. And I thought, yes, the title is Breaking Glass. That does relate to the glass ceiling that so many of us women have worked under and then through. And the subtitle is Tales from the Witch of Wall Street. And I know that is a bit of a surprise, so I thought I would read you just a little bit from the prologue in my book that might help you understand that. So I'm harking back now 5 years when I was having a birthday party when I had just turned 70. Now, a week before I stepped into my 70s, I was surrounded by 80 of my nearest and dearest, a medley of humanity from around the globe, ranging in age from 24-year-olds, namely my twin children, to nearly 85. Many of the guests were friends I'd made during my professional years, as I was making my way up the ladder in the take-no-prisoners world of Wall Street. For each person present, there was at least another who had been unable to attend for reasons mostly of geography. Amidst chilled champagne and exquisite hors d'oeuvres, I made sure to have my picture taken with every person attending, a way to memorialize this once-in-a-lifetime event. When the atmosphere reached its perfect state of cheer and relaxation, one of the guests reached for the microphone, and for the next 30 minutes, as the mic was passed from one to another, my past life was laid bare, or so it felt. Some tales were endearing, some amusing, others even hilarious. And fortunately, there were those who had the good grace to let the less glamorous moments of my past remain between us. But there was one tale that stood out. A woman, another professional from my Wall Street days, was sharing with the audience how she and I came to know each other and eventually bond with a deep friendship. I can still hear her words. She dated the story to 1985 when I was a portfolio manager at Citibank. The head of institutional sales called me into his office, she started. I was at Bear Stearns at the time. Behind closed doors, he spoke. Citibank is an important account for us, but we have a problem. A substantial portion of the assets is managed by a woman there who is difficult. I've put a number of different salesmen on the account, but the guys are all afraid of her. I'd like you to take on the account and see if you can build a strong relationship with her. I was nervous, the woman told my birthday audience. At just 27 years old, and because I knew of this woman only by her reputation. The traders on the block desk referred to her as the Witch of Wall Street, so I wasn't sure what to expect. The audience burst into laughter. My jaw dropped. Fortunately, I was sitting, otherwise I might have simply fallen to the floor. Me, the Witch of Wall Street? I managed to keep my composure, but on the inside I was horrified, mortified, and wanted to vanish. This being a festive occasion, there was only one thing I could do: laugh it off and be grateful that I was in a room filled with friends. In the aftermath of the birthday celebration, I couldn't get the moniker Witch of Wall Street out of my head. For weeks after the party, I wondered why it was that I never knew I was called a witch. On Wall Street, there were no secrets. Admittedly, I could be difficult in the never-ending pursuit of the best investment opportunities for my clients and the best execution on the trading desk. The decades-long journey up the corporate ladder until I reached the glass ceiling and eventually cracked through it was a stealing process born of pitfalls and successes, as well as a few fiascos and triumphs. Now, in my 8th decade, as I look back at a 30-year career on Wall Street, during which I rose step by step from front desk receptionist at the Boston office of Ladenburg Thalmann at the age of 19 to global partner at Invesco when I was 49, I've come to appreciate the complex mosaic of my life. In looking back on the path of my career, I am reminded of a reality that I have come to accept in the hard-charging world of business. Qualities of leadership that are part of climbing the ladder to success in business: drive, perfectionism, impatience, are expected of men, who are rewarded for exhibiting them. Those same qualities, however, can get a woman branded as a witch. That's the real world, and in that real world, there is more than one road to success. This book is one witch's story about starting on a journey with no map or destination in mind and achieving a level of success far beyond anything she could have imagined, and for which she had most certainly never planned. Thank you. So that's a little bit of the backdrop. And I think that many of us, many women, understand and accept that as the reality. And so we work in our own ways. We have to make our own decisions. And today, it's a far different world from when I started off as a young woman, starting at the very, very bottom of the ladder. Now, this book, Breaking Glass, is my second memoir. And it's a sequel to the first one, which was called Little Sister. And Little Sister is the story of my growing up in a cult. Simple as that. I wrote the book unwilling to say the word cult, but in the 5 years that have transpired, I've come to accept the reality that it was a cult. And I was kicked out of it because I didn't measure up, and measuring up meant that I was willing to spend my life as a nun in this community, and that was not my calling. So I was kicked out. My parents remained, my family remained, and I was completely alone in the world. I had been well educated, but I was not allowed to go to college. I had been accepted at Vassar and at Bates, but those had been turned down on my behalf, and I was left going to a secretarial school at the age of 18 to give me the credentials I needed to get a job and fend for myself for the rest of my life. And so I attended this secretarial school, and within 6 months had completed the course, and then I was on my own and I had to get a job. And I went to an agency in Boston to find an opportunity for interviews, and the first job I interviewed for was as the receptionist at a brokerage firm. I didn't even know what a receptionist did, but I got the job. And they asked me if I could start the next day. And I was so excited. I felt as though after the craziness of my life growing up, where I had never, I didn't know anything. I was culturally at zero. I was an infant when I walked into the world. Now, a year later, I was being offered a job as the receptionist. And all I wanted to do was to be the best receptionist in the entire world. I felt that I had a new lease on life, and that was my destination. And from there, one thing led to another. But meanwhile, I kept the story of my growing up in a cult a complete secret. I didn't know how to tell anyone. And I finessed my way through not knowing anybody, any movie actors or any baseball player names or even any slang word by keeping my eyes and ears open and my mouth shut. And I remember one time being on a bus when a very nice man turned to me. I was 18 at the time, and he said to me, "Has anyone ever told you you look like Lauren Bacall?" I had no idea who Lauren Bacall was. And I had to memorize the name, Lauren Bacall, Lauren Bacall. Don't forget that name. And that night, when I asked my mother, who was still very much of a nun, who was Lauren Bacall? She said, "Oh, darling, she was one of the most beautiful actresses in the world." And I went, oh my gosh, my mother telling me somebody was beautiful who was out in the world? And then I said, someone thinks I'm beautiful. And that was such a wonderful, warm feeling that I had. But little by little, as I got better and better at making my way through the world, I was raising my hand all the time to help. If I was going to be the best receptionist, I would do anything they wanted. And it was only a year later when the main partner at the firm, there were two chief partners, he came to me and he said, "We're closing a deal tomorrow, and we'd like you to go to New York," so I was in Boston, "and take the shuttle, and there'll be a car for you, and we need you to go to 5 investors and collect $1 million from each." This was 1968. I didn't even know what a deal was. I had to assume that closing a deal was good because I was bringing back $5 million, but I didn't have a clue what it was about. I went to New York, I collected the $5 million, I got back that evening and turned them over to the two partners, and they then took me out to dinner at the Ritz-Carlton in Boston. And I remember lying in bed that night and thinking, maybe I'll get to have a job like theirs someday. So that was very early on in my career. And I think one of the, kind of the modern day take-homes from some of my existence back then, because I may have been the 1960s and the 1970s, and there were far fewer women in business or in professional life. But for me, I found that adaptability was really, really important. If you were willing to be adaptable and say yes when someone asked you to do something you didn't know how to do, that reaped great rewards. And so when that happens once, then you get confidence when it happens again, and pretty soon you may not have done something perfectly, but you ask for help, and you build up your own confidence in being able to ask and figure out how to do things. And before long, the steps on the ladder were increasing. And my book is dedicated to the mentors in my life. And the mentors were only, once I got out of the cult, once I was out of the center, were only male. There were no women who were in a position to be a mentor to me. And I've heard people occasionally say, well, I had a terrible mentor. And if you have a terrible mentor, that is not a mentor. You did not have a mentor. A mentor is only a good and valuable person to you. And that chemistry between you and the mentor is so important. You have to trust them. They have to be willing to share and give. And that was a very wonderful learning experience I had. But I really saw it mostly when I looked back on my life. I wasn't always aware of how wonderful and supportive people were. And I'd like to just tell one story about the mentor, the shortest period of time I ever had a mentor, and it was only 2 months. I had already moved to Philadelphia and had been going to the Wharton School. I was putting myself through college at nights, and Boston University was accepting all of my credits. And May of 1974, many of you may not remember that time, but the price of oil had gone through the roof, interest rates were through the roof, inflation was through the roof, much worse than anything we have today. And the stock market was tumbling. And I got laid off from my job in Philadelphia, one that I really, really loved and had made such huge progress. So I moved back to Boston, and after a summer, I was able to find a job. And it was with a money management firm, and I was given the position as an analyst, a research analyst, by this guy named Stu Harvey, a gruff man, maybe 30 years older than I was, who had a spittoon in his office. I mean, that for me was so amazing. When he first started spitting, I thought, why doesn't he use a handkerchief? And then I realized he was spitting tobacco. At any rate, he said, I want you to follow the savings and loans industry. There was not an industry in greater crisis than the savings and loans in 1974. And I thought, what is he putting me through this for? Is he trying to see if I can handle it? And it was a brand new industry for me. I had followed things like trucking and railroads and insurance, but never savings and loans. And I kept going back to his office all the time and asking him, what does this expression mean? And what does this mean? And I'm seeing this, and this balance sheet's looking terrible. Always helped me, always helped me. And then one day, literally 6 weeks after I got the job, I was standing drinking at the Bubbler, and I heard two people talking, not whispering, just talking about the fact that this firm that I was at, Studley Schubert, was being bought by another firm called Gardner and Preston Moss, another bigger firm doing the same business, managing money in Boston. And I walked right from the Bubbler to Stu Harvey's office, sat down in front of his desk and said, are we being bought by Gardner and Preston Moss? And he said, yes. I said, and then just like this, I said, does that mean last in, first out? Which is really a bookkeeping term, an accounting term, and often relates to inventory. The last inventory in is what you mark against your costs. And he said, I'm afraid so. I had been in this job for literally 6 weeks, and while it was tough, I was learning. And this tear came down my face. And Stu said to me, please don't cry, you'll make me cry. This tough, rough guy. So I went back to my office, and maybe half an hour later, he came in, and he had this rough voice, and he said, I can't get you a job, but I can get you an interview. Tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, show up on the 29th floor of 666 Fifth Avenue. There's a firm there that, they're expecting you. And Brad Landon was the name of the guy. So I did that the next day. I spent the entire day in interviews, went out to La Caravelle for lunch, one of the most fabulous restaurants. And that evening, at the end of the day, I went back out to La Caravelle for dinner. And Brad Landon was sitting there, just he and I, and he said to me, we're coming here tonight because this is my favorite restaurant, and I want to invite you to come and work for us. Everybody would like you to come, and we do things as a partnership. He said, if I hadn't been going to ask you, I would have taken you to the St. Regis. And I remember thinking, well, that wouldn't have been too shabby. So I went home, having been offered a job for $17,500 as of January 1st, 1975. And it was a huge increase for me. And he had said to me, and if things go well, you'll end up making a lot more money than that. So I took the flight home, went right into Stu Harvey's office the next morning, absolutely first thing, 7:30. He was sitting there, and I said, good morning. And I had a big smile on my face, and I said, I've been offered the job. And I think he knew. I think they called him, because I realized then Stu Harvey had been the director of research at Fidelity. And in that role, of course, he knew every single sell-side research boutique, large firm, small firm. So he knew the people that he was setting me up with. But there was no guarantee. And then I kind of sighed and said, I'm so excited. I said, on the other hand, I just moved back from Philadelphia. My whole family's here in Boston. What am I going to do? And he said, breath voice again, do you want to make it big in this world? Yes, I said. Then go to New York. And that was his advice to me. I came to New York in January of 75. For all intents and purposes, I'd never really left. And that was a man whom I knew for less than 2 months. So to me, he was a man I immeasurably admire. And I looked and looked and looked for pictures of him to put in my book. I'm quite sure he's obviously passed on now. But that was one, I think, just wonderful example of mentoring that helped me so, so much. And I won't go into all the stories of the book is called Tales from the Witch of Wall Street because they're meant to be little episodes and things that help you see the pathway along which I was going. But I think the really important thing to share is that I never had a plan. And everything just kind of opened up in front of me, and when opportunities came, I took them. And part of the adaptability, and if it's okay, may I read another short chapter? This is a very short one. I was hired in 1980. I was hired by Peter Vermillier, an absolutely amazing and renowned portfolio manager. And he had come to Citibank in 1977 to basically turn it into a global investment management firm. And he hired me in 1980. And he hired me right during the first interview process. I never even got to HR. I never got to anyone else. He said, I want you on the team. So I had been there. He had made me head of the capital goods, global capital goods arena. I could hire anyone I wanted. And that was in June of 1980. In September of 81, so I had been there for 15 months in that role, and this is the start. It was Peter on the phone. I want to see you, he said. I'll be right down. What does he want? What challenge is he going to throw at me now? Peter was sitting in the tall wing-back chair that he preferred to the rolling chair behind his desk. It was where he read his newspapers and held his meetings, a less formal mode of engagement than from behind a desk. I took a seat on the couch next to his chair. Silence for a moment, and then he spoke. I want you to join the portfolio management team. He did not elaborate. I was taken aback. At the same time, I knew the business well enough to be flattered. Yet I was entirely unprepared to respond. I was grappling with what to say. He's promoting me. But, in the world of investing at that time, there was a perceived, but not fully defined, hierarchy among the professionals that made up an investment team. It was generally considered a promotion to migrate from research analyst to portfolio manager. The role of analysts could be described as narrow and deep, and portfolio managers as broad. After a few moments of silence, I spoke quietly. Peter, you've given me the best job I've ever had. I love what I do, meeting the CEOs of some of the most powerful companies in the world. I get to challenge them, to compare the strengths and weaknesses of companies globally. I know I do it well. How do you know I'll be a good portfolio manager? Peter listened without interrupting and responded in a subdued voice, I need you, and I have confidence in you. Will you give me some time to think about this, I asked. I was loath to turn him down. At the same time, I feared losing the intellectual challenge and the immense satisfaction that was the very essence of being a research analyst. Peter consented to my request, and I returned to my office pondering what had just occurred. He had offered me a promotion, one at which most people would have leapt in a heartbeat. He had in essence told me, although not in so many words, that he believed I was ready for the next step. Instead of thanking him for his confidence in me and accepting his offer, I had begged off, putting my own interest ahead of his. I did not feel good about my response. Over the next few weeks, I gave more thought to my reaction. Peter had played the noble role, yielding to my request to remain an analyst. I was keenly aware that I had let him down, something he had never done with me. Am I afraid of what I don't know? Afraid of losing my reputation as a tough-minded machinery analyst? Afraid of failure? Am I stuck in my ways at the age of 33? I wasn't sure of the answers and tried to put the issue behind me, but it wouldn't go away. A few weeks later, 3 Citibank portfolio managers announced that they were leaving to form their own company. 3 out of a team of 12 was a significant loss of talent. Within seconds of hearing the news, I left my office, took the stairs down to the 22nd floor, and walked into Peter's office. Peter, I know you need me. I'll join the portfolio management team. And that for me was really a pivotal moment in my career. And I think an example of that adaptability and flexibility that one has that ultimately serves one well because others see in you that you're ready, willing, and able to help them. So that was a giant step in my career. And within a couple of years, I was managing billions of dollars. And there's someone in this little group here tonight, sitting right here in the front row, who was a cohort with me. And so she knows many of the tales of this Witch of Wall Street. But there came a point in my career when I turned 40 years old. And I was married. I had gotten married at the age of 37. And my husband had 3 children. And he was kind of finished with having children. And I didn't make bones about that. We were very, very happy together. And I sometimes consoled myself, as it were, by saying, you know what? I'm not sure I could be a great career woman and a great wife and a great mother. And yet, when I turned 40, I knew in my bones that I wanted to have my own children. And John and I were at a lovely restaurant in New York for my 40th birthday, and I said to him, I have to tell you something. And I basically said, I really want children, and I don't want 10 years from now to be 50 years old and an angry woman because I didn't tell you now. And it was a very, very wonderful moment. And from there on, he was completely on my side as I tried at the age of 40, a little bit late in life, to start trying to have children. And I tell some very funny stories about that. But within my office, my best friend became this woman here, sitting here, Alex Trower. And there is a chapter, it's the last one that I'll read, but it's a very poignant one. And it might not be one I would read in every crowd, but I'm so proud of her. I knew she was coming here, so I wanted to read this one little chapter. And it's called, it's 1993, The Best Birthday Present Ever. Alexandra Trower was my closest friend and also a co-worker, vice president in charge of corporate communications. She was 15 years my junior. Oops, is that okay to say? And our friendship grew in little steps over a decade. A trusted confidant, she offered endless moral support in my often emotional journey to motherhood. She was married and herself keen to start a family. For my 43rd birthday, she gave me a present in the form of a gift certificate to a psychic reader. You must visit her. She's amazing, were her words, as I opened the envelope and read the name Verushka. The image that instinctively came to mind was of an elderly Russian woman in a shroud, hunched over an orb, and speaking with a heavy accent. I will, I responded, trying not to sound half-hearted. I was a skeptic when it came to psychics and palm readers, and I thought tarot cards were a hoax. My mistrust harkened back to my childhood when Father Feeney would lambaste what he called sorcerers. However, I kept the gift card, and each time I opened my desk drawer, the name Verushka stared up at me. But I couldn't drum up any interest in making contact with her. Why should I go to some charlatan who's going to pry me with questions and then give me answers couched in gibberish? I'll just be wasting my time. In December, my hopes for motherhood were dashed once again, when the nurse from the hospital called to let me know that the pregnancy test had come back negative. The report was emotionally crushing, in particular, because the signs of pregnancy had been so prominent. In the privacy of my apartment and before John, that's my husband, came home from work, I sobbed. At the age of 43, I was beginning to fear the worst, despite the continued optimism on the part of my doctor. This was not like me. Failure was not part of my lexicon. I was used to putting shoulder to the wheel and effecting the results I wanted. My only New Year's resolution was to stay optimistic and believe in miracles. A few days later, when I opened my desk drawer, the Verushka gift card came alive, and unexplainably, I found myself eager to visit her. I dialed her number. The voice at the other end of the line was as American as mine. I explained my purpose and settled on a time a couple of days away. Inviting was the best description of the curtained-off space in Verushka's apartment that was dedicated to her profession, with a soft-cushioned couch and a warm glow emanating from the colored lights in the small lamps. There was nothing exotic about the woman herself, and in short order, she shared with me that her real name was Ann Johnson and that she'd been married to an oil executive. As she turned over the tarot cards that were in small piles, she spoke in terms of seeing things. I did my best to keep an open mind, but was finding it difficult not to harbor a significant dose of skepticism. What kinds of things is she seeing? Just looks like pictures of weird people. I was an obvious neophyte in the realm of symbolism. Then came a question. Do you have children? No, I responded, doing my best to put no emotion into the statement, lest she be swayed in her thinking. Then examining my hand, she said, "You have the longest lifeline I have ever seen." I smiled. Who wouldn't be appreciative of a long life? The analyst in me wanted to ask, and will it be a healthy long life? But I didn't want her to be distracted from the important matter at hand. She returned to the small pile of cards and spoke of family as she made her way through them, but she drew no response from me. If she was a genuine psychic, why did she need me to answer questions? Then, taking my right hand again, she turned it sideways and stared with intensity at the outside edge. After a brief silence, she said softly, "I see 2 children." Once again, the skeptic in me came to the fore. 2 children, are they mine? Externally, I remained calm, but inside, I was all aflutter. More questions, more cards, more internal angst. The session was coming to a close, and my skepticism had turned to curiosity. What did she mean when she said, "I see 2 children"? As I opened my mouth to speak, she looked up at me and said, "You will become pregnant in May." It was around January 10th. I stared at her, speechless. She offered nothing more, and I, unfamiliar with the appropriate etiquette for a psychic meeting, thanked her and left, carrying with me a secret that I shared with only 2 people, my husband and Alex Trower, who'd given me the gift card and who had recently shared with me the news that she was pregnant. I will simply tell you, that was 1993. My children were born February 13th, 1994, so you do the arithmetic. I became pregnant in May. So these are some of the kind of stories that, fill this book. But they all relate around family and career. But there came a point in my career when I knew it was time for me to move to another career. My children were 5 years old. I was a global partner at Invesco, and we were on vacation, my husband and I and the 2 children, and they're twins. And John came in one afternoon and said, "Sweetheart, we're playing on the beach all day. I'm swimming with the children, and you're on conference calls." And I realized that to be the best wife, the best mother, and the best businesswoman, there was no time for anything else. And that was over Labor Day weekend when we were up in Rhode Island. And I woke up the next morning, I said, "Honey, when I go in to the office on Tuesday, I am going to retire. I'm going to tell them that I will give them till the end of the year and I will retire. I was 51 years old at the time, and that's exactly what I did. I left Wall Street when my children were 5 years old, and I went home with no idea of what I would do, but I kept my finger in the pie by being on television, which I'd been doing for years. But I was taking them to school every day. I was engaged with them because they were now old enough to ask the questions that I wanted to answer. And that became my next career, which was a wonderful one. I became an expert witness, I became a board member, and then I started mentoring young girls. Many in East Harlem was where I first did it, and in Catholic schools there, and had another second career. And so the long and the short of it is, the story I want to say is, mentors matter, seek them out. Mentors are not necessarily role models. You know, role models are people who maybe subliminally you admire or you take after. And I say that because in my childhood, this woman that ran the cult, she was a woman in charge of an organization of 100 people. Not one man pushed back on her. And I think one of the reasons I was never fearful about opportunities or projects or challenges on Wall Street was, I think, somewhere in the back of my mind, that woman, even though she was never a mentor to me, I wanted her to love me and I could never find a way to make her love me, but she was powerful. And gender was not an issue for her. And I think I adopted the same instinct. It didn't matter. Being a woman didn't prevent me from doing anything. And I'm not saying that I would wish that kind of an upbringing on anyone to give them that power, but I do think that a lot of good can come out of what doesn't seem so good at the time. So I hope that was helpful.